Right now, without trying, your mind is already talking. It has commented on these words, judged whether this video is worth your time, wondered what comes next, compared this to something you have heard before. Perhaps it has already begun planning what you will do after this ends. You did not ask it to do any of that. So who is actually thinking? That question, simple, ordinary, almost too obvious to take seriously, is the question that ancient sages spent their lives pointing toward. Not because it is a philosophical puzzle to be solved, but because the moment you genuinely stop and look at it, something shifts. Something that has been running on autopilot for years suddenly becomes visible, and what becomes visible can begin to change. You have probably tried to stop the overthinking. Most people have. They try breathing, journaling, exercise, positive thinking, counting backward from 100, telling themselves to just relax, to let it go, to stop catastrophizing. And for a moment, sometimes there is a brief quiet. Then the thinking returns, louder than before, as if it resented being interrupted. Here is what nobody has told you about that. The thinking keeps returning, not because you are broken, not because your mind is defective, or your discipline is weak, or your circumstances are uniquely difficult. It keeps returning because of a single misunderstanding. A misunderstanding so old, so invisible, so completely unquestioned that most people carry it from birth to death without ever stopping to examine it. A misunderstanding so fundamental that every technique, every method, every attempt to manage or reduce the overthinking addresses only the symptom while leaving the cause completely untouched. You have mistaken yourself for the voice inside your head. And that single mistake, nothing else, is the real reason the overthinking never stops. Think about what happens when someone criticizes you, not a stranger, someone whose opinion matters, a parent, a partner, a person you respect. They say something about you, not even something devastating, just something slightly unflattering, and your mind immediately begins working. It replays what they said. It formulates responses you wish you had given. It searches for evidence they were wrong. It worries they might be right. It constructs elaborate arguments and then tears them down. It runs the same loop again and again and again. Hours later, sometimes days later, you are still in that conversation, still processing, still arguing with someone who has long since moved on and is thinking about something else entirely. Why does this happen? Here is what most explanations miss. The problem is not that you thought about what they said. Thinking is natural. The problem is that somewhere in that process, you stopped watching the thinking and became the thinking. You stopped being the person observing the thought and became the thought itself. And a thought that has no one watching it from the outside, no quiet witness standing apart from it, will run forever. It has nothing to stop it. It has no frame, no boundary, no beginning and no end. The ancient sages call this identification. and they said it was the root of all restlessness. Look at the structure of a typical day. You wake up and immediately your mind begins cataloging what needs to happen today, what went wrong yesterday, what someone said, what you should have said back, what might go wrong this afternoon, what you need to prepare for, what you forgot, what you are afraid of. And underneath all of this thinking, beneath every loop and every replay and every anxious anticipation, there is one constant. You're watching all of it through the eyes of what other people think. Will they approve of this decision? Will they respect this choice? What will they say if this fails? What will they think if this succeeds? Are you doing enough? Are you becoming enough? Are you the right kind of person yet? This is what the ancient texts were pointing at when they said, the mind that is turned entirely outward has no rest, because the outside world never stops changing. People's opinions shift, circumstances rearrange. Yesterday's respect becomes today's criticism. Yesterday's achievement becomes tomorrow's expectation. And the mind that is measuring itself against all of this has no stable ground to stand on. It keeps thinking because it keeps searching. And it keeps searching because it has not found anything outside itself that can truly hold still. The exhaustion you feel is real, but it is not the exhaustion of someone who has thought too much. It is the exhaustion of someone who has been looking for rest in the wrong direction. There is a reason why you cannot stop your mind through force. Every time you try to stop thinking by thinking about stopping, you have added another thought to the pile. The instruction "stop thinking" is itself a thought. The effort to be quiet creates noise. The attempt to be still produces agitation. This is why sheer willpower never solves overthinking. You cannot think your way out of overthinking. It is like trying to douse a fire with fuel. The ancient sages made a discovery that sounds simple and reveals itself as profound only when you actually test it. There is something inside you that is already still, not something you have to create or earn or practice into existence. Something already present underneath the thinking, the way the surface of a lake might be churned by wind while the water at the very bottom remains completely still. The depth is always there. The noise exists, but it exists on top of something that the noise cannot reach. The ancient sages call this the witness, the one who watches thought without being thought. You have already experienced it. Every time you noticed yourself thinking, you were briefly in it. The thought says, "I am worried about this." The witness notices there is a worry. One is inside the experience. The other is watching from a slight distance. That slight distance is everything. Here is a story that points directly at it. A student came to a master and said, "My mind never stops. I have tried everything. I cannot find peace anywhere." The master said nothing. He pointed to a candle burning in the corner of the room. The student looked at it. After a long silence, the master asked, "Who is watching the flame?" The student said, "I am." The master said, "And is that one, the one watching, is that one disturbed?" The student went very quiet, because the one watching, the flame was perfectly still. The chaos was in the thoughts about the flame. The watcher itself had never moved. That watcher is what you are. Not the thoughts, not the commentary, not the voice that says you are not enough or you should have done it differently or what will happen tomorrow. The one underneath all of that, the one that can see all of that arising, has never been in chaos. Think about what happens when you reach for your phone. You pick it up without deciding to. The hand moves before the thought arrives. You scroll without looking for anything specific. You put it down. 20 seconds later, you pick it up again. Not because something important arrived, because the mind needs input, the way a fire needs fuel. And in that reaching, in that automatic, unconscious, completely unchosen gesture, you can see the identification perfectly. The mind moves and you move with it. No gap, no witness, just thought becoming action before you had a chance to see either one. Now imagine catching yourself mid-reach, hand extended toward the phone. And instead of completing the gesture, instead of disappearing into the scroll, you simply notice there is an urge to reach for the phone, not I am reaching for the phone. But there is an urge right there in that half second of noticing the witness has appeared. The urge is still present, but you are no longer entirely inside it. You can see it, and what you can see, you are not completely owned by. Think about what comparison does to the mind. You see someone else's achievement, their success, their relationship, their life, and immediately the thinking begins. They have more. You are behind. You should be further along. Something is wrong with the path you are on. Maybe you are not capable enough. Maybe you made the wrong choices. Maybe this is simply not going to work. This loop has no natural ending point because comparison is infinite. There is always someone ahead. There is always another standard being met by someone else that you have not yet met. The finish line keeps moving. The benchmark keeps rising. And the mind that is measuring itself against an endless external standard can never arrive at rest. The ancient sages observed this with extraordinary precision. They said, the person who lives by comparison has handed their peace to everyone else in the world. They wake up in peace or in agitation, depending on what they see when they look at others. Their inner state is no longer their own. It belongs to circumstances, to other people's lives, to the constant movement of what is happening outside. And this is why they cannot stop thinking. It is 2:17 inches the morning. Nothing is happening. The room is quiet. The house is still. There is nowhere to be. and nothing that needs doing for the next 6 hours. But inside your head, you are replaying a conversation from Tuesday. The other person is asleep. They have not thought about this since it happened. They have moved on completely. They are dreaming about something else entirely. You are still arguing with them, still finding the perfect response, still rehearsing what you should have said, still running the scenario through again looking for a version of it that ends differently. This is the mind without a witness. This is thought running without anyone watching it from outside. The conversation happened. The thought about the conversation is happening now. And without the distance of the witness, without someone able to see that this is a thought, not reality, the mind cannot tell the difference between Tuesday's conversation and this moment. Both feel equally present. Both demand equal energy. Both feel equally real. The person who has found the witness can lie in that same dark room at 2 a.m. and notice there is a thought about Tuesday. And in that noticing, even briefly, even imperfectly, Tuesday recedes to its proper distance. It happened. It is not happening now. The thought is happening now. And a thought, once seen clearly as a thought, has already lost half its power over you. Because thinking is how the mind tries to solve the problem. If I can just figure this out, it says, if I can just find the right answer, the right approach, the right path, the right words, then finally I can rest. But the problem has no solution at the level of thinking, because the problem is not in the content of the thoughts. The problem is in the relationship to thinking itself. Here is what changes when the witness is found. Not discovered, it was always there, but recognized, seen clearly for the first time as something distinct from the content of the mind. A thought arises, I am worried. Instead of immediately becoming the worry, instead of letting the mind follow that thought down every possible corridor, building elaborate structures of what could go wrong and how to prevent it, you notice there is a worry. You see it the way you see a cloud, present, real, but moving, not permanent, not you. From that position, something shifts. The thought loses the energy that only comes from full identification. A thought that is watched, genuinely watched. From that quiet place outside, it does not grow the way a thought grows when you are completely inside it. Think about the person who posts something online and then checks compulsively to see how many people responded. Every refresh is a thought becoming a world. The number of likes is not just a number, it is a verdict on their worth, their choices, their life. The thought people aren't responding becomes a story about who they are. And that story creates anxiety, and anxiety creates more checking, and more checking creates more anxiety. Now imagine that same person just noticing that a thought has arrived. The thought says, nobody is responding. And instead of becoming that thought entirely, they see it. There is a thought that says nobody is responding. The thought is still there. but they are not inside it the way they were before. The story cannot build in the same way. The checking impulse is there, but it has been seen, and what has been seen cannot completely own you. This is not a dramatic transformation. It is a fraction of a second of clear seeing. But in that fraction of a second, the cycle has been interrupted. The witness does not fight thoughts. It simply does not get lost in them. And gradually, not overnight, but gradually the mind begins to settle. Not because you stop thinking, because the relationship to thinking changed. This is what the ancient sages meant when they spoke about inner freedom. They did not mean a life without thought. They did not mean a mind emptied of content. They meant a mind that is no longer enslaved by its own content. A mind that thinks when thinking is useful and rests when rest is available. A mind that is not continuously running because it has not found a stable place to rest. That stable place was never outside. It was always within. Not the thinking that never stops. Beneath the thinking, the witness that watches without judgment. The stillness that exists even when the surface is churned. You have been trying to solve overthinking by changing the thoughts, replacing negative thoughts with positive ones, stopping bad thoughts from arising, managing the content of the mind through effort and discipline. But the ancient sages pointed at something different. They said, "You are not the thoughts. You never were. You are the one watching them." And the moment that recognition becomes real, not as an idea, but as an actual living experience, something in the mind that was perpetually tightening begins quietly to release. Imagine spending 40 years trying to silence a voice. 40 years of effort, of discipline, of techniques tried and abandoned, of moments of relief followed by the same noise returning, of wondering what is wrong with you, that everyone else seems able to find peace and you cannot. And then discovering, not through another technique, not through more effort, not through finally getting everything right, but through one moment of genuine seeing that the voice was never you, that you were the one who could hear it, that the hearer and the heard were never the same thing, that you were not trapped inside the noise. You were standing outside it all along, so identified with it that you forgot you were standing outside. That discovery does not happen all at once. It happens in fragments, in moments, in brief windows of genuine recognition that accumulate slowly into a different way of living. But it begins with one honest question. Who is actually thinking? The mind was never the enemy. Identification was. The next thought will arrive. Let it, watch it, don't become it. Because the mind may never stop producing thoughts. That is what minds do. The question was never whether thoughts would arise. The question was whether you would keep believing that every thought is you. The overthinker is not someone with too many thoughts. The overthinker is someone who has forgotten there is a space between the thought and the one watching the thought. That space has always been there. In every moment of genuine noticing, every time you caught yourself mid-scroll, mid-replay, mid-spiral, you were briefly in it. The witness was present. The overthinking paused for one fraction of a second. You were never trapped by your mind, only by forgetting who was watching it. And now you remember. That is where the real change begins. Not with a quiet mind, not with thoughts that finally stop arriving, but with a different relationship to the ones that do. Something quiet has been watching all along. It was there before the first thought of this morning. It will be there after the last thought tonight. It is there right now, watching these words, watching whatever is arising in response to them, watching the mind decide whether any of this is true. That watcher is what you are. It always was. There is something worth sitting with here. Most advice about overthinking treats the mind like a machine that is running too fast. The solution offered is to slow it down. Breathe, count, distract yourself, exercise. Meditate. Replace the bad thoughts with better ones. All of this treats the mind as the problem and you as the engineer trying to fix it. But the ancient sages observed something. The engineering approach misses entirely. You are not separate from the mind in the way an engineer is separate from a machine. You are inside it. Or rather, you believe you are inside it. You have identified with the thinking so completely that you have forgotten there is any distinction between you and your thoughts. And this is where the endless exhaustion comes from. Not from thinking too much, from the continuous effort of being completely merged with a process that never stops. Think about what it would mean to carry another person on your back every moment of every day, never putting them down, never having a moment where they are not your weight to bear. The exhaustion would be total. Not because carrying someone is impossible, human beings can carry extraordinary weight, but because the carrying never stops. There is no moment of rest, no moment of just being your own weight. Identification with thought is like that. The thinker and the thought have merged so completely that there is no moment of just being. There is always a thought that needs to be thought, a worry that needs to be worried, a comparison that needs to be made, a future that needs to be planned, or a past that needs to be reviewed. And none of it ever resolves. Because it is not trying to resolve, it is trying to occupy. A mind completely identified with thought is a mind that cannot stop, because stopping would mean a moment of just being, and a mind that does not know how to just be experiences that moment not as rest but as emptiness, as danger, as something that needs to be immediately filled with more thinking. This is the trap. The mind is afraid of its own stillness, so it keeps generating content to avoid encountering it. Have you ever noticed what happens in the moment just before sleep? The moment when the body has become heavy and the room has become distant and the thoughts begin to lose their coherence, they start to blur at the edges. The narrative falls apart. The loops stop completing themselves. And for a brief suspended moment, sometimes just seconds, there is something present that is not thought, not nothing, not sleep, something more like awareness without an object, presence without content, being without becoming. Most people pass through this state so quickly they barely register it. Then sleep arrives and the moment is gone. But in the morning, if you pay attention, you can sometimes catch the reverse, the moment when consciousness returns but thought has not yet resumed. A brief window of clean awareness before the mind picks up where it left off. Those moments are not accidental. They are not the absence of the mind. They are the mind at rest. The mind in its natural state, before identification takes over and the thinking begins again. The ancient sages said, what you experience in those brief windows is your actual nature. The thinking is what you do. The awareness is what you are. And the entire project of inner freedom is not about achieving something extraordinary. It is about learning to recognize what is already present in those quiet moments and understanding that it does not have to wait for sleep or the edge of sleep to be available. It is available now. Beneath this thought and the next one and the one after that, the witness has been here all along. When a person begins to discover this, really discover it, not as a concept to collect, but as an actual living recognition, something unexpected happens. Know that the thoughts stop. The thoughts do not stop. New situations arise. The mind still processes them. Worries still form. Plans still develop. The ordinary work of thinking continues. But there is a quality that changes. A quality of being caught, of being swept away, of the thought arriving and immediately becoming the entire world. That quality begins to thin. The thought arises, and there is a moment, however brief, of recognition. There is a thought. Rather than, I am thinking, and I am this thought, and this thought is everything, and I must follow it wherever it goes. That fraction of a moment changes everything. Because in that fraction of a moment, the thought has been seen from the outside. And a thought that has been seen from the outside cannot completely own you, cannot run its full length with your complete energy behind it, cannot build the elaborate structures of worry and comparison and replay that it builds when you are entirely inside it. The ancient sages described this as becoming the master rather than the servant of your own mind. Not by fighting the mind, not by suppressing thought, not by achieving some heroic state of mental silence that most people will never reach. By simply learning to see. By developing the capacity to notice a thought as a thought rather than immediately becoming that thought. The person who can do this, even partially, even imperfectly, even some of the time, lives a fundamentally different inner life than the person who cannot. Not because their circumstances are different, not because they have different thoughts, but because their relationship to the thinking has changed. And the ancient sages said, this change is available to everyone. It requires no special gift, no unusual intelligence, no years of difficult practice before anything becomes possible. It requires only the willingness to look, to actually look with genuine curiosity at what is happening in the mind right now, to watch the thinking rather than continue being entirely inside it. That looking, that simple, available, always possible act of turning attention toward the activity of the mind itself is the beginning of everything. Not the end of overthinking, the beginning of being free from it. Because the mind that is watched is not the same as the mind that runs unwatched through the night. And the person who watches, who finds even briefly that quiet place from which watching is possible, has discovered something the thinking mind can never give them. The rest they have been searching for was never in a different thought. It was in the space between thoughts, in the witness that was always watching, waiting patiently for you to notice it was there. There is one more thing worth understanding about the mind that overthinks. It is not broken. This is important because most people who struggle with overthinking eventually begin to believe that something is fundamentally wrong with them, that they are defective in some way, that other people have quiet minds and they alone have been given this relentless machine that will not stop. But overthinking is not a malfunction. It is a habit, a deeply entrenched, long practiced, completely understandable habit, but a habit nonetheless. And habits can change. The mind has been doing this because it learned that thinking was how to stay safe, that reviewing the past would prevent future mistakes, that anticipating every possible problem would reduce their likelihood, that monitoring what everyone thinks would help maintain necessary relationships, that analyzing every situation completely would eventually produce the right answer. These are not irrational beliefs. They served a purpose. In certain environments, in certain phases of life, constant vigilance and constant thinking was a reasonable response to a world that felt unpredictable or threatening. But the mind that learned this lesson carried it too far. It generalized the strategy, applied it to every situation, made it automatic. And now even when you are safe, even when nothing is wrong, even when there is nothing to analyze or anticipate or prevent, the mind keeps running. Because it no longer knows another way. The ancient sages were not judging this. They were not saying the thinking mind is evil or wrong or the enemy of awakening. They were saying something simpler and more compassionate than that. They were saying the mind is doing what it was taught to do and it can learn something else. Not through punishment, not through the exhausting effort of fighting every thought that arises, but through the gradual, patient, actually rather gentle process of discovering the witness, the place of observation that is already present, already still, already available, and learning to rest there even briefly, even imperfectly, even for a few moments at a time. That resting changes things, not all at once, not dramatically, but in the way that a stone smoothed by water is changed not in any single moment, but through the accumulation of many moments, each one small, each one leaving something behind. The mind begins to understand that thinking is a tool, not an identity, not the only mode available, not something that must run continuously in order to keep you alive and functioning. A tool, available when needed, quiet when not. This is not a state that most people reach quickly. It is a direction, not a destination. A gradual shift in the relationship between the person and the thinking, a shift that begins the moment genuine watching becomes possible, and that deepens with every moment of watching that follows. The great irony of overthinking is this: the mind overthinks in order to find peace. Every loop, every replay, every anticipation of every possible problem, it is all in service of the same goal: safety, resolution, rest, the end of uncertainty. But thinking cannot produce the rest it is looking for, because the rest is not in any thought. It is in the space between thoughts. It is in the witness that watches. It is in the awareness that is present before the thinking begins and remains after the thinking stops. The mind has been searching for its own stillness in the wrong place, like someone looking everywhere in a bright room for the source of the light, not realizing that the eyes doing the looking are themselves the thing they are trying to find. The awareness that is searching for peace is itself the peace it is looking for. You are not your thoughts. You are the one watching them. And that watcher, that quiet, already still, already present awareness has never been restless. It has never been afraid. It has never needed the next thought to make it feel safe. It is already whole, already at rest, already home. The overthinking will not stop the moment you read these words. That is not how this works. But something may shift, a slight loosening of the grip the thinking has on you. A brief moment of seeing the thought as a thought rather than being entirely inside it. That slight loosening is everything. Because in that space, however narrow, however briefly, you are no longer the prisoner of your own mind. You are the one watching it. And the one who watches is always free. Pay attention to what is happening right now. As you listen to these words, something is receiving them. Something is here, present, aware of the sound. And that something is not itself a thought. It is prior to thought. It is the ground in which thoughts arise and pass. You are that ground, not the thoughts that arise in it. The ground itself. When the ancient sages said turn inward, this is what they meant. Not the kind of inward that is just more thinking about yourself, more analysis, more self-examination, more mental commentary on your own mental commentary. but the kind of inward that is simply present, simply aware, without content, without agenda, without the next thought already forming before the current one has finished. Just this, just the awareness that is here right now. Modern life makes this almost impossible to notice. Every moment is filled with something, a screen, a sound, a task, a notification, a conversation, a memory of a conversation, a plan for the next conversation. The space in which pure awareness could be recognized has been filled so completely for so long that most people have entirely forgotten it exists. But it exists. It has always existed. It exists right now, beneath the words you are hearing, beneath whatever thoughts are arising about those words, beneath all of it. The mind that overthinks is not the enemy. It is a mind that has forgotten what it rests in. Remind it, not through effort, not through discipline, not through the next technique or the next method or the next attempt to force the thinking to stop. Through noticing, through a moment, this moment, any moment, of simply seeing that beneath the thinking there is awareness, that beneath the noise there is quiet, that beneath the exhaustion there is something untouched by exhaustion. The rest you have been looking for is not in a quiet mind. It is in the awareness that was watching the mind all along. It was never missing. It was only overlooked. And the moment it is seen, really seen, even for an instant, the overthinking loses the one thing that kept it running. Your complete and unquestioned belief that you were the thoughts. You were never the thoughts. You were always the one watching them. That is what you are. And what you are has always been at rest.